now close the executive session and reconvene the public meeting. The purpose of the executive session was to discuss real estate for consideration of sale, purchase, or lease pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101C. No action was taken by the commission during the executive session. Okay, so roll call. Commissioner Shepherd.
Here.
Commissioner Bell.
Here.
Commissioner Briscoe is present. Let the record show all three commissioners are present. Okay. So the public comment periods, there will be, during the meeting, there will be two public comment periods, one at 4:30, another at 5:30 PM. Out of respect for everyone who attends the commission meeting, each public comment period may be limited to 15 minutes total. Speakers are asked to keep their comments to less than 3 minutes. Please feel free to submit further comments in writing. The advisory meeting, committee meeting schedules. Marina Advisory Committee meeting, Tuesday, May 14th, 2019 at 6 PM, Commission Chambers, Harbor Center Building, 1801 Roder Avenue, Bellingham. The TAC, Technical Airport Advisory Committee, Thursday, May 9th, 2019 at 9:30 a.m. at the ARF Conference Room, 2005 West Bakerview Road, Bellingham International Airport. The BIAC, Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee, Thursday, May 9th, 2019 at 5 p.m., ARF Conference Room, 2005 West Bakerview Road in Bellingham International Airport. So with that, we have public comment. We have one person, Mr. Pete Granger, if you please.
Thank you, Commissioners. Pete Granger, working waterfronts. I'm not talking about no net loss at the moment. I wasn't available last week to hear Maury Ingram's talk and presentation. I think it was really interesting. I'd heard about the community food campus in the past, and it's exciting that it's going to be near the waterfront. I'm reaching out to her to see if I can get involved because I haven't perceived that there's a whole lot of interaction with the seafood industry or commercial fishing on that effort at this point in time. I've got some experience with direct marketing of fish. We envision a direct marketing wharf near there. The fact that the community kitchen is something I think that fishermen potentially could utilize to develop products in addition to just any retail activities there. So I just wanted to let you know that. I'm going to try my best to see that fishing and seafood gets interjected there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Anything we could do to help you get connected with him, we can give us a call. Is there anyone else that would like to speak at this time that hasn't signed up? Okay. I guess we're on to the consent agenda.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through F.
Commissioner Bell, any questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple. Sorry about that. I'm going to pull this aside. Elizabeth, this isn't deal killers. I just need some explanation on a couple of things that didn't square in my head on the on B, which is the collective bargaining agreement. And it's just numbers. Sorry to be so specific on this, but when I look at the 2018 to 2019, 2020, 2021 projections on the second page, and we talk about a 3% increase, those numbers are higher than 3%. Is there something else built into those numbers that makes it higher than 3? If I just do a flat 3% on the 2018, it doesn't come up to 17.
Sure. So Elizabeth
And it is
Monahan,
compounded, right?
Yeah. Elizabeth Monahan, Director of Human Resources. What's actually built in there is that we have a couple of automatic step increases. So from introductory firefighter to firefighter 1 to firefighter 2. And so we have some new people, and those increases are built in. So that's why it looks like more than 3%.
That was the big one.
Anything else?
Nope, that was mine.
Easy, okay.
Anything further?
No, that one.
Do you have something else?
No, go ahead.
Commissioner Shepherd.
I just wanted to make sure we checked in with some of the folks from the firefighter union employees who are here about the contract. I know there's been a lot of moving pieces in this negotiation, and I wanted to just thank both Elizabeth and Rob for all the work it took to get into the left pool, and I think that's been a good move. And I just wanted to just get a check-in from one of the representatives here, if this process, this bargaining agreement is acceptable for you guys. If you come and introduce yourself and let us know.
Zach Rushing, Local 106. Yeah, we worked hard on this agreement. It took quite a while. We started in November. And both sides came together, and I think we both got some things that we were looking for. We look forward to continuing to build our relationship with management and, work towards making the airport safer and more efficient in the future.
Okay,
Yeah. And we're in favor of it.
great. Well,
Thanks.
thank you, Will.
Thank you.
We never all get everything we want. I certainly don't. So I'm glad it was a collaborative process, though, and I appreciate everybody really bringing a good spirit of negotiation to come to a good deal. There are a lot of new moving parts here, so I wanted to make sure that we did check in and that everyone was on the same page. So, thank you. That's it for me.
Slid that, you don't get everything you want in there. Is that a hint? So you got viewers watching or what? Birthday coming up, maybe?
I'd usually break into a Rolling Stones song about here.
Anything further?
Can't always get.
Oh, no, I'm gonna stop that. We gotta quit that. I have no questions.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through F.
Commissioner Shepherd?
Aye.
Commissioner Bell?
Aye.
Commissioner Briscoe's aye. Carries 3-0. Oh.
If I might make a motion, please, to amend the minutes of April 9 as previously adopted. And the reason for my suggestion is, as you'll see here.
By Dan's not making a motion, she's suggesting a motion.
Yes.
So I'd like to suggest a motion for changing, or excuse me, revising the minutes to be shown as corrected. So if I might suggest a motion.
Okay, so this is for clarification purposes. We have a word that's doubled in there, and I believe it was Cherry Point.
Yes, it's the whole paragraph there. It was repeated
The whole
in 2
paragraph.
months, minutes.
These are the April 9th minutes that were approved on April
Right,
23rd. Sorry, my microphone wasn't on. April 9th minutes that were approved on April 23rd.
thank you.
And there's just some text that was carried over from the previous minutes, and so it doesn't belong in
Change
this
anything.
document, so we're just
Correct.
striking that from the record. Okay.
So if I might,
I'll make a motion that we adjust the minutes as provided.
sure, thank you.
Commissioner Shepherd?
Sounds great.
Mr. Bell? Aye. Mr. Rose, aye.
Thank you so much. With item 1, a motion approving resolution number 1381, authorizing the refunding of existing revenue bonds in the amount not to exceed $26 million.
Tamara Slabjack, Director of Finance. Commissioners, this resolution is to approve the refunding of the Port's 2010 Build America bonds. These were issued to primarily fund the airport terminal expansion. Just as a little bit of history, back in February, our bond underwriter, Justin from Piper Jaffray, reached out to us and let us know that the rules had changed for the refunding of these and that they were now eligible. And at that time, back in February, the estimated savings was about $1.5 million. Last week, he checked the market rates again, and we're looking at probably over $2 million savings over the next 10 years in interest costs. So this is a good news resolution. So pending approval today, the bonds will have final pricing on June 4th and close on July 9th. So it's a pretty straightforward transaction. I would like to introduce our bond counsel, Cynthia Weed and Scott McJamnett. They're sitting in the back row, and they are responsible for this 80-page resolution. So if you've got any questions, I would refer those to them.
And Tamara, I missed what you said what it was originally we took the bond for.
The airport terminal expansion, and then
Airport
some other marina projects, but mainly the terminal expansion.
Okay. Great.
And you're not joking, right?
I'm not joking.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Bell?
So we'll see that savings over the projected life of repayment?
10 years.
That's right.
Over 10 years?
10 years.
Okay. So we get to spend that now, then, for the future, right?
Well, we can talk about
Always get what
spending
he
it.
wants to spend it now. Where are we going with this?
That discussion later as well.
Budget retreat's coming up.
Budget retreat, perfect. Okay.
Thank you, folks, for being here. Any questions?
No.
Any questions? Pretty
I don't have
straightforward.
any
We get to save
questions.
money, other than where you can spend it. Okay.
Thanks for making the trip up.
Yes, appreciate that.
Okay.
Sorry, we didn't, hopefully they treated you to lunch or something. Or you treated them.
Cynthia is our favorite lawyer.
Of course you did.
Okay, Diane, if you please.
A motion approving resolution number 1381, authorizing the refunding of existing revenue bonds in the amount not to exceed $26 million.
Commissioner Shepherd?
Aye.
Commissioner Bell?
Yes.
Commissioner Briscoe's aye. Carries 3-0.
You save us that much money over that period of time, and they make you buy lunch?
Man.
She's starting a lot of rumors today.
So it looks like we have Mr. Hogan for our, unless I'm out of order here, for our update.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mike Hogan, Public Affairs Administrator. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Tom McBride with McBride Associates. Tom is one of our lobbyists that represent the port. We actually have a joint legislative strategy between the port, the city, and the county. We've had that for a number of years, and it's been really effective in getting our interests down in Olympia represented. The session closed April 28th. It was the first time in recent memory that they haven't had an extended special session. So Tom is going to give us an update. I've also asked him there was some significant changes to the hazardous substances tax. As you know, one of our top priorities is the MOTCA remedial action grant funding. We did do well getting those grants this year. However, there were some significant changes kind of later in the session to that program. So Tom's going to talk that through, and then also mention some overall the impacts to, between the low carbon fuel standard and carbon policy and the changes to the hazardous substance tax, oil spill program funding. All those had some impacts to the refineries. And so there's 5 refineries in Washington. 2 of them are in Whatcom County, 2 in Skagit. As you know, it's a really important part of our local and regional economy. So I've asked Tom to give an overview about some of the legislation that impacted those refineries. So thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, Tom McBride from McBride Public Affairs. I work on your matters in Olympia with Ben Buchholz. He and I both represent you. It's a pleasure to do so. And I also want to thank you at the outset, because every time we convene in Olympia, you're down there with us, and that makes a big difference when you join us in Olympia. Even when you're not there, I know frequently you're working with your legislators and other key people on the phone and through email, and it does make a difference. And we saw that in the capital budget in particular, I think, this year. So what I wanted to do is give you a little bit of overview of Olympia activities, little context, and then I'll hit some of the general issue areas, and then we can dive into some of the port-specific matters. If you want to ask questions while I go through here, feel free to interrupt me. Just to provide a context, political overview, democratically controlled environment in Olympia, both chambers of the legislature, the House 57-41, controlled by the Democrats, and the Senate, which is a change from prior recent years, a more dominant majority now for Democrats there, 28-21. Governor's office, of course, Governor Inslee, a Democrat. So we haven't had that kind of one-party control in quite some time. Last year, Democrats did as well, but it was about a one-seat margin in the Senate, so it wasn't a strong working majority. So as Mike said, 105 days in and out. They got done in time. Major accomplishments, about 2,200 bills introduced, Keep in mind, some, depending on how you're looking at this, some bills are good, some are bad. But even the ones that didn't get through, if you didn't like them, they're not truly dead. This is a 2-year legislative session. Any bill introduced in the first session will come back in the second session and any special session. Also, political news, the big news there, we've had the same speaker for 20 years, Speaker Frank Chop out of Seattle. He has announced that he's going to step down, and it sounds like the House Democratic Caucus intends to name his replacement in end of July timeframe. So that'll be a big change. Economically, very strong economy, thanks to you and others around the state creating jobs and growing the economy. $4.5 billion in new revenue in excess of the prior biennium 17-19. $4.5 billion in addition projected for the 1921 biennial budget. So despite the strong economy and that growth in the revenue, that does not keep up with existing maintenance level spending needs. So we went into the 19 session at the end of the 17-19 budget already underwater. So there were discussions from the very beginning about the need for new revenue. The maintenance level spend for 1921 goes up $5.8 billion. So that's above the $4.5 billion in excess revenue. This is an interesting fact, about 2/3 of that maintenance level spending of $50.5 billion goes to K-12 education. That's largely a result of some of the recent investments due to the McCleary action, where the state needed to pick up its spending and catch up, where they had allowed some of the local governments to take up some of that role. So the 1921 spending level is at $52.4 billion, and I'll talk a little bit about that after a few highlights here on bills. But $52.4 billion budget is about a 17% increase over the 17-19 budget spending level. So when you think about the big issues, the big themes in Olympia, think about labor, tax, healthcare, climate, environmental issues. Those were all very, very big, hot issues this year. I'm just going to pick out 5 or 6 big ones that you've read about, but just to give you some highlights. There's a long-term care benefit trust program put in place. It's the first state in the country to do that, where there will be a 0.58% fee on employees on their wages. That money, kind of think of it like a workers' comp type arrangement. That money will go into a trust, and for qualified employees, about 3 of 6 years or 5 of 10, depending on details, you could qualify for a long-term benefit program. Based on the money that you've put in through your wage contributions over the years. So that's a new program. It's a big one, and it's very novel and unique. And I bet we'll see that in other areas of the country.
Can I ask a
Not
question
too
about
long.
that real quick?
Of course, yeah.
Sorry
you
to
bet.
interrupt you, but
No, no.
is that in a trust? I mean, it's locked away. The language was very specific that it's not going to be used for the general fund.
As long as it goes to the general.
That's my question.
Well, I know that
Is it in a lockbox?
there's some history here with other
some
funds
history
that
here,
might
yeah.
cause you concern, but this one, I can't say exactly how it's locked away, but it is declared to be a trust fund, which is unusual language to use. We used to always call the Public Works Assistance account Public Works Trust Fund, and that's been rated year after year after year. But the trust designation does suggest, just like workers' comp and unemployment insurance, that it is the people's money and it's locked away for that purpose. That's my understanding. Clean Energy Program 5116. That's a big bill that passed the legislature this year. It requires that utilities eliminate coal from their electric production by 2025. Utilities must make all retail sales of electricity with GHG neutral sources by 2030, and it sets standards for utilities to meet 100% of electricity load using non-emitting and renewable resources by 2045. So it's a very aggressive clean energy program that did get through. Daylight savings time bill, you've probably heard a little bit about that. Permanent Pacific Daylight Time usage in the state was passed by the legislature. That does require congressional approval, so it won't happen yet, but some other states are doing it too, and there is a little bit of a rollout there with states doing that.
I know California passed this last year, so did they obtain congressional approval for those?
I don't believe so. No, it's a good, yeah, and it may be that the Congress, if it acts, would allow for multiple states to do it. I don't know if they would identify particular states, but they could have, like you said, because I think California was one of the first to do it.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I did not think this would get the legs it did when people started talking about it, but it got a lot of attention. I mean, an extra hour in the evening is nice, but it comes from somewhere, you know. It's dark some other time. Affirmative action bill did pass on the last day of session, or second to last day of session, I think it was the last day. So that will change the law that prohibits affirmative action activities in the states. That was Initiative 1000. Data privacy law, that did not pass, but that got a lot of attention. You read about it. It gives consumers some control over the data that are collected and used by companies or governments, or, you know, data is huge and it's everywhere, and it's being collected. And it also addressed facial recognition. So there are a lot of opportunities for consumer control currently, but this bill would have put more control in the consumer's hands. And there's no question about it, that bill will be back, not just because it's still alive, but there's just a lot of interest in it. Low carbon fuel standards, Mr. Hogan mentioned that. That's House Bill 1110. That is a bill that would have limited greenhouse gas emissions to 10% below 2017 levels by 2028 and 20% below 2017 levels by 2035 through the use of a clean fuel standard, low carbon fuel standard program. That did not pass. And another bill that did not pass that I thought would, that was a plastic bag ban bill. That got a lot of action very, very early. And I don't know if it just peaked too early and interest and energy went elsewhere, but that one did not make it out. And also a bill that would have banned straws. Plastic straws did not make it out, 5077.
Could I ask a question about the low carbon fuel standard? So do we expect that to be back in the next session as well?
I think it will be back. Yeah, there's quite a bit of support for that in the House. It did get out of the House
Yeah.
and died in the Senate. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, to some extent, that's one of those bills that people, I think, people in each chamber saw different ways to reach greenhouse gas reductions. Some people liked the low carbon fuel standard approach. Some people liked more of a cap and trade approach. Carbon tax had been on the ballot and failed. So there was some sensitivity to what the voters had said at the ballot and what was the best way to proceed. And in light of the clean energy bill, I think there just wasn't enough time to get something through, and there wasn't ultimately agreement in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's one that we see has been functioning in California for some time.
Yeah.
Oregon has one, and BC has one. And so we've been in definitely some conversations with interest of increased renewable fuel production here locally. Mm-hmm. And it really helps to have that market, which currently renewable fuels, if they're produced in Washington State, they largely leave. Mm-hmm. And they go to California, where the market demand has been achieved through those low carbon fuel programs. So from many of the industry partners I've talked with, it's a definite interest to see that happen in the future.
Yeah, and there were some testifiers too that indicated, at least one indicated there was a project in process in the Grays Harbor area, I believe. And I'm not suggesting that's not still in process, but that was one of the arguments in favor of the state endorsing this idea, was we're going to have some more production here in the state, potentially. Just quick comments. I talked about the operating budget in terms of size and growth. But what I didn't talk about is the shortfall that I'm indicated at the beginning. The legislature did increase revenues about ballpark $1 billion over the course of the 1921 biennium. And, picking out some of the highlights, there was a business and occupation tax increase for certain businesses, primarily service businesses, that raised about $370 billion over the next 2 years. That was House Bill 2158. There was an additional 1.2% B&O tax on financial institutions, 2167. That generated about $133 million over the next biennium. There's some tax preference elimination legislation that picks up $54 million. Doesn't sound like that much relative to some of the other numbers we're talking about, but that's a significant chunk right there, $54 million. That was derived primarily from the elimination of some tax preferences for travel agents and tour operators. Also, some changes to the non-resident sales tax exemption remittance program that uses now a refund program that will reduce the money that is collected by people from out of state. Graduated real estate tax, about $244 million over the next 2 years. The capital gains tax was proposed but did not move. That was a big proposal as well. That one did not go. And there were a couple other odds and ends that, actually the tour operators and the travel agents was $5 million, and the $54 million I mentioned was the non-resident sales tax remittance program. So, you know, it was a little bit of dogs and cats and putting all that together along with the hazardous substance tax, which we'll talk about in a moment, and it came up close to about $1 billion for the 2-year biennium. Diving down, and then the other thing I want to mention, some really good news on the capital budget, the remediation action grants, the Westman Marine money, $2.9 million. You had the Cornwall Avenue landfill at $2.4 million, I&J Waterway, $7 million, Central Waterfront, $1.9 million, and the Whatcom Waterway, $2.25 million. So very nice results in the capital budget for some of your projects. Some of the port issues I wanted to highlight, the MOTCA and HST bill, that was 5993. And that bill did a few things. You know, it major changes to the program, but there weren't a whole lot of changes if you really take a look at it. The big one was changing the value-based tax of 0.7% of value to what they called a volumetric rate of $1.09 per 42-gallon barrel. So that should create a more stable revenue source and keep that fund more predictable, because as you've seen, as the price of oil went up and down, it was tough to manage that at Department of Ecology. So I think that was a change embraced quite broadly by the folks, business, labor, et cetera. But there were also some changes, and that would raise about $133 million, just so you know, in that first 2 years, about $133 million, in addition to the other money that was already being accumulated. So there will be an increase there of about $133 million. The accounts were restructured and renamed. And there is, I think, a little more flexibility with the use of the funds that caused some concern among some. And the budget does rely on a transfer of some of those MOTCA HST monies of about $75 million for this budget cycle, which is, I think, what led to the question earlier about the trust for the long-term program, long-term care program.
Can you go into that a bit? Did they put this in a trust? The $75 million is going to go where?
Well, the $75 million went to general fund, like it has in the
Really?
past. Yeah, like it has in the past.
Yeah, good for them.
Yeah. But they're, we'll see what happens in the future. It's a concern, and it's been happening for a few years now, as you know. So that's one major change to something that affects the refineries. Another one that I wanted to mention was House Bill 1817. That is a bill that addresses workers at high hazardous facilities, including refineries. And that really calls out the refineries to do three things. Number one, it requires the owners and operators of the refineries to require that contractors and subcontractors use a skilled and trained workforce to perform on-site work. A skilled and trained workforce is defined as workers that are registered apprentices or skilled journey persons. And it also requires that workers receive high-intensity or high-level safety training by 2022. So that was a bill that concerned some people in Olympia. I think the obvious question is, what does that do to the employee workforce that would be contractors and subcontractors? And one of the obvious issues that comes up is the apprenticeship program doesn't exist necessarily for non-labor workers, non-union workers. So it'll be interesting to see how the non-union workforce adjusts to comply with this new law, and if they can put in place some training programs that would satisfy this bill. But that's a bill that does affect the workers of the refineries, and obviously it was designed to promote safety, and then the question is, how the different workforces will respond to that. So the details have yet to be determined, and that'll take a while to roll out, but that's one that I wanted to highlight for you. We talked about the remedial action grant money for the port cleanup projects out of the capital budget. So those were the three big port-focused bills I wanted to mention. Are there other things that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, tell us about broadband. There was a broadband office setup.
Yeah, the broadband issue has been of high interest to ports. It's been it's been considered for a lot of years, and it has failed for a lot of years. And so this was a big development. I think it didn't go as far as a lot of people would have liked to put the money in it that would have really resulted in robust broadband to rural areas. But but with the creation of an office at the state level, it does make it a focal point for future work and investment. And sometimes that's what it takes. As we know, sometimes bills come out and they end up in the form of a study or a work group to prepare for the next session. And I think this is a more robust outcome, in my opinion, to have an office in the governor's executive branch.
So it's a funding for an office or a designation for an office, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee we're going to get our grants funded that we've applied for.
Door, a plaque,
I think that's true. There's no guarantee, but I think the hope would be, and I think there's bipartisan interest in this. The hope would be having an office designated for this purpose will draw more attention to it and make it more of a focal point.
Okay. What about funding for the dam removal on the Nooksack? Have you been involved with that?
Somewhat. I'd have to get more details on that. The dam removal issue was of high interest and highly controversial as well, as you can imagine.
But Commissioner Shepherd's talking about the Nooksack, not on the Snake.
Okay,
Right.
so,
The diversion dam that the city of Bellingham uses on the Nooksack River.
okay.
Should have been completely separate than the Snake River conversation.
it was, you're right. I was thinking about the Snake when you said that. But I can get more details on the Nooksack issue for you,
Okay.
yeah.
It's like heartburn, this Motka thing where the money goes into the general fund. Very much discussion about trying to fix that so that's not where it goes? Or does they just feel it's a free grab bag to do with what they want? I mean, it's,
I think that there is a lot of discussion to figure out how to avoid that. I mean, it's happening at the Public Works Assistance Account level, which is a different fund entirely, the Motka. But it's been a common use of those funds to try to balance the budget. And despite the record revenue increases, I really do. I'm not trying to give them a pass, but I do point to the Supreme Court mandate for increasing education funding, so that a lot of that new money went into that demand. It went into that need, and it didn't allow a lot for other types of projects. So the question would be, do they raise more revenue than what they did, or rely on some of these existing funds that could be rated? Now, I'm not an advocate of that. I can tell you that local governments, it kills them. I mean, this money is there for their infrastructure and economic development programs. Those programs like the Public Works Assistance Account are highly successful. The Motka folks would say that's not what that money was collected for. And so there's good reasons to be concerned about that. But it will continue to be a problem. And I don't think we're at the end of that.
I'm going to go a step further. I want to know what we can do about it, because there's two problems that we have with it, is that we continue to raise money for the general fund on a false principle. And that is that they're raising money for Motka and they're sending it to the general fund. And so how can we as a commission have an impact on that? Because it's not true. You're not raising the Motka funds for cleanup. You're raising
Robert, for Peter to pay Paul, and it never works out in the end.
and we need that 75 million. And quite frankly, it's a ruse. And I want to have an impact on that. How can we do that? What is our best? We called this year, had no impact. I talked to every legislator. It had no impact.
Yeah.
What are we doing wrong?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a large group. I mean, you're not alone. The ports, the local governments, the cities, the counties are all saying the same thing, particularly with the Public Works Assistance Account. I mean, that's probably of even a higher attention level. But the point is the same. It's money that was collected for a different purpose. The best thing we can do is grow our coalition and say that they argue against it. I mean, the problem is they're going to ask, where are we going to get the money from? And it's going to drive the discussion of new revenue, which also creates controversy and opponents in that area too.
Yeah, but in my mind, it'll drive the discussion in the right way.
It could.
When you're
could,
doing a user
yeah. Mm-hmm.
tax, you take the money for what you're taxing it for and use it for that purpose.
Yeah.
And if they're overspending on the general fund and we need more money for education, that's got to come from that discussion. And this robbing Peter to pay Paul drives me crazy, so.
Well,
We'll build a coalition, I guess. We'll start with the WPPA and
Yeah, and
work
it's-
our way around.
It creates an easy route to get money, so they don't have to figure out how to fix it. We'll just go there and get it. And that's, I mean, instead of trying to figure it out, they know they can go over here and grab it, so they just keep doing that, and they never fix the real problem. You know,
Yeah.
not that I know how to fix it, but I know it needs to be fixed, because it's gonna get worse, not better.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, that was going to be my comment. This is not going to get better anytime soon because revenues are not going to continue to increase at this rate. And the costs of the program, of existing maintenance level programs will. So there is a coalition. I don't think we need to start from ground zero, and I do think the coalition works well together. But we're not accomplishing our objective of preserving those funds for the purpose that they were designed. You're right.
Any further questions?
No. Thanks.
I have none, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Informative.
By the way, we appreciate the work you do. You guys do a tremendous job for us, and we're always pleased when we're down there.
Pleasure, thank you.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Just a quick follow-up. The Middle Fork Diversion Dam, it was a city-led project. The request was $10.5 million. That was funded in the budget. It was their top priority, and so I know they have some other funding for that project, so we'll see that moving forward to the next, I think they'll begin construction or deconstruction this fall. And then second, as far as how can we stop rating on the account, I know we've talked to some other ports with large cleanup project. We have Whatcom Waterway Phase 2. There's also large cleanup projects coming on the Duwamish and Port of Everett and Tacoma about potentially modeling it after a way they've funded hospitals in the past, where it creates some sort of lockbox mechanism. So we'll continue to explore the coalitions that Tom mentioned and legal options for how we could legislatively secure that money for so it doesn't get rated. So anyway, stay tuned. We'll keep you posted.
I guess we have Brian is up next.
All right, good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowron, Director of Environmental Planning Services. At the last commission meeting, Commissioner Shepard, you had requested an update on kind of where Harcourt was at on the granary building and tenanting and some of the other projects. And coincidentally, Max Duffy from Harcourt was already planning to be in town. He just got in town yesterday. We'll be here for a month, working on closing a number of leases, working on details with prospective tenants, working with the plans for the next phases of projects, all that kind of thing. So rather than going through one of my updates, I could actually gladly hand it off and have Harcourt give a presentation on where they're at on a number of those issues. Also, Chris Erdman, their leasing agent from Bellwether Realty, is here as well to update kind of the status of where the vendors are at and other things in the granary building. There's a number of slides here. A lot of them are photos to kind of show where they're at on things. So Max is going to go through that, and then we'll all be available to answer questions. So.
Hi Commissioners, thanks for having me back. I'm Max Duffy, work for Harcourt Developments in the Dublin office, joined by Chris Erdman here, who is our listing broker. So I've just put together a few slides for you just as an update, just on how we're getting on, any progress. Chris is going to take over from me just to give you a quick run through on how we're getting on with the granary tenants and all the inquiries we're having. So if we start from the top, I suppose, at the outset, it's a collaboration between us and the port and the city here for waterfront development. I'll show you the master plan in a second. So this is going to be 10 to 15 years of work. We're going to build 2 million square feet on the waterfront, creating a new corridor for Bellingham, recreational facilities, connectivity, and restoring the waterfront. It was great, even just my first day in town in the city today, to go down to to see all the people down at Waypoint Park, which is getting great traction. A lot of people down there eating their lunch. You can see that now that the road is open and the infrastructure is there, that a lot of people are actually using it, which is fantastic. So this is our master plan for everyone who hasn't seen it. So this is going to be built in phases. Obviously, phase 1 is the granary building, as you see there, in the entrance of Granary Avenue. Phase 2 is the residential, the waterfront condos, 94 units there. Phase 3, the gateway office, which will be speculative built offices for the board mill, which we will be converting into a hotel. Number 5 is the alcohol plant, and number 6 is the middle section, which will be used in mixed-use commercial. So I suppose, from our point of view, it's very important that we kept the 3 existing buildings on the site, and that is the granary, the board mill, and the alcohol plant. We also thought it very important to keep any historical artefacts, so that a lot of those will be dotted around the site and in the hotel, especially, just to keep a bit of throwback to the history. So this is it in 3D, as you can see. Okay, so the phase 1 is the granary building. So we have temporary occupancy. There's a yoga studio who are actually open and operational. They're doing classes this morning, which is great. So we'll be getting our full occupancy cert this month, with all the building to be completely finished. So it's a redevelopment and extension of the granary for restaurant, brewery, coffee shop and office, and a market on the ground floor, which Chris will outline to you in a minute. So I suppose I thought it important people always forget just in how bad a state of repair the building actually was. So we actually had to sign waivers to go into the building at the outset. We brought it right back to the shell and had to do some structural stabilization. So this was it when we took it over. As you can see, there was a fair bit of work to be done. We stripped it right back to the core. And you can kind of see the bottom 2 images, it taking shape. At the moment, that's the basement on the top, and then the second floor on the other, the right-hand side of the top. So that's been stripped right back, and the images below are how it's looking today. So this is the front facade, which has been redeveloped and redone. The shop fronts have been installed. This is our extension, which has been clad, and all the glass balustrade has been put up. And this is our nice decking area, which looks beautiful on a sunny day. So I'm going to just pass you over to Chris here, who's going to just give you a quick run through of the tenancies, and then I'm going to take back over.
Thanks, Mike. Greetings, commissioners. Thanks for having me up here. Chris Erdman with Bellwether Commercial. For a brief update of what's happening, been on this job for a few months now, and we've been getting a lot of attention from local vendors, clients, and also people from outside the area. The activity has been pretty much daily out there. We've been having a handful of showings, sometimes up to 5 a day, but around 2 to 3 at least at the minimum per day. We on the ground floor, we're constructing something like a food hall and open air market. And we have different vendors signing up. We have a coffee shop that's already, that we're putting in place for a lease this week. We have lots of attention from breweries. We're picking a brewery to join this spot. Not a surprise to Bellingham and everything that's been going on there. As far as restaurants, we're getting a lot of attention with restaurants, and we're trying to choose which are the right types of tenants to go in there. So we're definitely getting a lot of attention. Just on CoStar the other day, my representative called me up and said, you guys must be getting a lot of attention. I had about 15,000 hits, which is, for me, I think it's a lot of hits for one project here. So I'm pretty pleased with that. So we'll be utilizing that for some more reverse prospecting. On the 4th and 5th floor right now, we already committed to a hair salon with about 40 stylists, and they look to be doing some sort of a school or apprenticeship program out of there. So that's a company that's already up and going, so that'll be a nice addition to the granary and the waterfront. And we also are talking to some outdoor recs company, looking to pick one after we choose a ground floor brewery. So if we get that rec company in there, which it looks pretty promising, they'll have potentially up to starting with 20 different vessels like paddle boards and kayaks and whatnot, doing clinics out in the bay. So that'll be really exciting for our community. So also taking requests, if anybody wants to see something down at the waterfront, feel free to give me your peace of mind. I'm doing everything, asking the locals what they want down there, and that's where a lot of good referrals come from. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Chris?
Yeah, so just following on from Chris, this is our final layout of what the market's going to look like. So you can see the communal seating there. If you look to the left, that's the extension, that part in blue. It looks like we're going to split that into two, and they are going to be more of a restaurant use. So we have committed along the right side of the wall there, we have committed a meat pies vendor, a mead and a tap house. We have coffee, we have a soup kitchen, we have a Mexican restaurant. I suppose, as Chris said, we have a lot of different types of users, and we just want to make sure that it all meshes in properly. We don't want to be over-reliant on food and beverage. We'd also like to have some sort of retail there, but it's also very important for us to keep a bit of flexibility to promote local businesses. So we will have about 7 or 8 vendors who will be on longer term leases, but then some flexibility for us to give space away either for free or on a day rate, just to promote local businesses. So, and as Chris said, he's working closely with Western Washington. He has a few interns who are doing a lot of work for him there, especially on the marketing side, and that's something that we will keep focus on. This is our level 2. Just to give you a bit of insight, we have a request for proposal. So essentially terms for three different occupiers. One's an engineering company, one's co-working, and then another is a kind of insurance company. So we think co-working could be great. The sentiment I've been getting from talking to people is the offering of co-working in Bellingham is a bit, it's a bit mixed and matched. There's small spaces all over the place, so to consolidate would be quite a good use. And with the market downstairs, just to drive footfall and get people in there. So this is our yoga studio. They're up and running. So as you can see, that's what the internals look like. So it looks quite good, actually. And a lot of the exposed beams and the wooden floors, it's really coming along. So as Chris mentioned, level 4 and 5, we have signed a lease with Honey Salon. So their fit out is going to commence immediately. Then there's 1,500 square feet at the very top of the tower, which Harcourt are going to keep for their on-site offices. So that's the granary. We'd be delighted especially if the commissioners want to either come down and have a walk through the building this evening or any time. I'm here for a month, so whatever suits you guys, and we'll get a nice evening and have a look out over the deck. So I suppose I'll just move on to phase 2 very quickly, which is the waterfront residential. So as you can see there, 94 total units. We will have 30,000 square feet of waterfront commercial space. Our land use permit was put in April. Our full permits are expected next month or for submittal or the month after, and construction will commence by Q4 2019. We're looking at about a 2-year build time, so we should begin occupancy at the end of 2021, maybe the start of 2022. So here are some brief renderings of what they're going to look like. So I know, Commissioner Bell, I dodged your question the last time I was here in terms of the pricing. So we're looking at 1-beds here are an average size of 850 square feet. They're going to be priced at about 350 to 400,000. 2-beds, average size 1,500 square feet, about 650 to 750. And then the 3-bed penthouses of upwards of 2,200 square feet, and they'll be around the $1 million mark. Okay, so and also the retail, we've had preliminary discussions from a host of occupiers. Waterfront retail will go really well down there. So again, we're just looking for the right uses. So the next is the Gateway office, which is going to be directly opposite the granary when you come in on Granary Avenue. However, it's a completely different product. the granary building is much more mixed use. We wanted to keep it that way. We want to have control of it. We want it to be busy. We want people to be in and out of there, people to feel that they can come down and use it. This will be slightly different. It'll be grade A office space with blue chip tenants. It'll be swipe in, swipe out. You know, it's kind of a different use altogether. So we do have some drawings for 150,000 square feet at the moment. That's as much as we can go. However, we think we might tone it down a little bit if we have to, and there'll be 300 car parking spaces here. So these are the preliminary drawings. These are just concepts at the moment. There's a bit of wow factor there. I know a split opinion, but you know, we're looking at something in this mold. So these aren't final. This is just a concept for the moment. And then the Boardmill Hotel. So this is actually very important to us. Harcourt as a company, we have two hotels in the similar vein as this, which are redevelopments, the Titanic Hotel in Belfast and the Titanic Hotel in Liverpool. And this will be a Titanic branded hotel, the Titanic Boardmill in Bellingham. So we're looking at 208 bedrooms at the moment and an 800 person conference centre, 73 undercroft car parking spaces. So we have done, this is just obviously some photos of the existing structure, which we're trying to keep the integrity of. As I mentioned before, it's very important for us to keep the board mill, the granary and the alcohol plant on the site. So as you can see, some of these internals, this will all be stripped right back. And this is our preliminary concept rendering of what the facade will look like. We have...
I saw the hot air balloon.
Yeah, well, architects, huh? So you have a site plan here. So as you can see, that'll be ground floor, it'll be restaurant, banquet room, back of house, a nice hotel lobby, and you'll come through, and that's undercroft parking at the back with hotel rooms overhead. And as you can see there, that'll be our conference rooms on the first floor. So that's just a concept of your typical hotel room and some images from the Titanic Hotel Liverpool. So it'll be very much in the vein of the Liverpool Hotel, which is a 5-star hotel in obviously in Liverpool in the UK and a popular wedding venue. So just to give you kind of an indication of how we managed to turn this building around, you can see the before and after photos there. So it's going to be very much, you know, in the similar vein. So this was voted the 5th best hotel in the UK in 2018. So it's won numerous awards. So we are kind of best in class at these redevelopment projects, especially in the hotel side. So we're very excited about this project. And then Know Your Audience. We've had some famous guests, and the wedding of Russell Wilson and Sierra was there as well. So he's got his new contract, so it's okay to put this in. So, and then just a final concept drawing. Obviously, once we fill it all in, you know, phases 4 and 5, this is just a concept of what the downtown will look like once it's all taken shape. So, any questions?
Commissioner Bell.
First, thank you. There's 2 things that happened this week that were tremendous. Chris, getting the word out with the newspaper article was a tremendous help. We field a lot of questions for you.
Sure.
We're kind of at the tip of the spear, and we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys own it. But getting publicity out there about what's happening is always helpful to us. Mm-hmm. And it keeps us from, as one of my commissioners reminded me, butting in.
Sure.
In places where we don't belong. So the more of that you can do, the more help you will be to us, because we really don't want to meddle. But this was tremendously helpful, because a week ago I had a bunch of questions about where things were, how it was going. Last 2 days, a lot of those gaps have been filled in.
Right.
The more of that you can do in this community, the better.
Right.
Because the question is, for everybody, when?
Of course, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I do want to thank you for that.
No, of course, and look, that's understood. And as Brian said, I'm here for a month now, so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, just a lot of finishing off in the granary and then permitting with respect to the residential, just to get moving and just to keep it
And
fluid.
on that note, I didn't see you in the yoga photo.
Yeah. I'm booked in for the Thursday morning,
Did
so
you?
yeah.
Yeah, I'll be there with a camera. We'll see.
Don't send that one to the Bellingham Herald, please.
No, and we also understand some of the difficulties you're having with the city, with some of the permitting issues, and we're very aware of that. And the more of that information we get, the more it helps us help you.
Sure.
And we really want to help you.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because it's helping us.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
very
no, absolutely. Again, another reason why you know, I'm here for such a long stretch of time, just to make sure that we can iron out all of these details out.
Yeah. And I agree with Commissioner Bell that we need to see more of this public information. And I
Okay.
think that's the thing that's been lacking the most, is that when folks don't know what's happening down there, it sets off speculation, which is one challenge. And then it leaves people feeling like they're in the dark, like this isn't a priority project for Harcourt, that we're kind of in some backwater of not necessarily being funded or given the attention this development and this opportunity really needs. And I think where that intersects, where I do feel that we have a role, is that the public is paying for all the infrastructure down there to make this possible. We put in roads and lights and utilities. We even built you a park, and we're going to build a pump track. So there's a lot of amenities that not every developer gets when they go to a build process. So I think that's where the public feels that extra claim, and I think it's rightfully so.
I agree.
And so that's my encouragement for you, is to put yourself in a better light, and it of course helps take some of the pressure and questions off us, is to do more of those articles about the meat pies and that are going to be there, and the vendors. There hasn't been an article about the yoga studio. I didn't even know it was open until I found out a couple days ago they had their first class. So anything you can do to really invite the public in, encourage them to understand what's happening, see the timeline, and it's going to make people feel better. Because I think there are things to celebrate here about what's happening. We certainly want to see this development project work out, and for these, for projects like the board mill to be able to happen. But we really need to feel the assurance as well, so that we can feel confident moving forward with you.
Okay, that's understood. Absolutely.
Yeah, just on that note, it's easier for us to explain, if you put a time frame out there and you don't meet it, it's easier for us to explain why you didn't meet it than to have it go dark and to have people wonder what's going on. It's a much easier question to say, their timeline was fourth quarter, like I heard today, fourth quarter 19.
Yeah.
Well, if it gets stretched into first quarter of 20, it's because of this. That's a much different question than going dark and people saying, what the heck is going on? When is this going to start? And so those kind of things are just really important to us and this community. So I would appreciate more timelines and those kind of things, even if you miss them.
Yeah.
It's a much better discussion to talk about why you missed them and how that happened than it is to be dark. And right now, we feel like we've been in the dark for a lot of this discussion.
Now, to our defence, we have been hamstrung by the sub-area amendment, which has now kind of been ironed out now. So the roadmap is there, and it is clear, and transparency from us will be forthcoming.
And can we get a copy of that photo of what the interior?
Absolutely.
You got the
yeah.
floor plan in there with the
Yeah,
vendors?
yeah, absolutely,
Can somebody just send that over to us?
Absolutely.
Chris, I'll be in your office tomorrow.
And just a question on the ground floor of the granary, those restrooms are in there. One of the constant questions we get is there are no bathrooms at Granary Park, where people, at Waypoint.
Yeah.
And where do people go for easy access to restrooms? So when the general public is interested in going and buying their coffee and everything else, there are public restrooms in
There,
there.
absolutely, yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Max. That was a good presentation. And Chris, it's for the people of Whatcom County, this project's been a long time coming, and frustration levels have risen through time. And Whatcom County is a pretty good rumor mill when it wants to be, so the rumors get started. And as my two colleagues have said, anything we can do to divert rumors from starting is the best. Like they say, the best offense is a good defense.
Yeah.
Or is it the other way around? Best defense is a good offense. I got it. So anything, any news you have that you can share with us that Mike, is Mike still here? Oh, yeah. He can put in our newsletter, so we can get stuff out that people read. Anything you can do PR-wise would greatly reduce the phone calls on our end of what's going on and why are you allowing this to happen? And this is you guys' project, and I'd like to see you run it that way. And I think the best advantage you could have in Whatcom County is to let the people know all the time what's going on. Whether it's good or bad, it doesn't know. They just need, it doesn't matter. They need to know. And I think things will be very smooth for you. So thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you being here.
And as always, thank you guys for your continued support and for having me here. And to special mention to Rob, Brian, and Mike, who work with us closely on this day today. So just want to say thanks.
The greatest lesson for me today is I can tell some people to shut up,
Yeah.
right? Because they come to us and complain, right?
Yeah.
It's really nice to be able to do that, so thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
One more thing.
Go ahead.
We didn't mention the Bellingham Yoga, Collective Yoga is going, we're trying to figure out giving the public free yoga on Friday nights. So we're not sure if it's, how often it's going to be, if it's going to be once a month or every other week yet. But Harcourt has said that they're going to allow, when we get permitted, the al fresco portion of that building to, so the public can have that free yoga class. And so on behalf of Harcourt and then also Bellingham Yoga Collective.
For those that don't know what al fresco is that the third floor of the annex there, the deck that we saw the picture of on the top of the annex?
Yeah, it's the third floor. It's about 2,500 square feet.
Will you work out the same arrangement with the brewery and the coffee shop? Friday nights free.
Actually, the brewery has asked if they could participate in that on the Sunset Yoga. So it could potentially turn into 6:30 to 7:30 free yoga and 7:30 to 8:30 a beer and Sunset. So who knows?
Beer and yoga?
Okay, we're going to take a short break for 10 minutes here. We'll return it. We're going to have a little change in the presentation sequence. I'd like to have the Working Waterfront Coalition speak at this time. And I'm sorry, you still get to speak.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jim Kyle, Vice President of the Working Waterfront Coalition. So we really appreciate this opportunity to make this presentation. Consider it a privilege, and I guess it means that the bell won't ring. So I won't be longer than 25 or 30 minutes. So today we're going to
gong, Jim. We'll have a gong.
No hook. Well, we'll see how it goes. Today we are going to ask you to consider adopting a new policy, but first a bit of a review. We currently represent 115 locally based maritime businesses of all sizes. And our mission statement is to promote the vitality and economic benefits of our working waterfronts for the citizens of Whatcom County. The proposal we are about to make is close to the heart of this mission, and many of the port's recent actions have made you partners in this effort, and for that we are very grateful. And so on to the business at hand. We are proposing the adoption of a no net loss of working waterfront principle, which would address only port-owned property. A draft of this principle, which I think you have in front of you now on that handout, reads, for any land use changes or any series of related changes, there should be no net loss of land, buildings, and waterfront access that is available, designated, or in active use for working waterfront activities. Now, to understand this principle, think of wetlands mitigation. But I want to make a point here. Our proposal has nothing to do with wetlands and nothing to do with biodiversity. It's just an example of a process. So, and we may not have made that clear enough at the outset, but it's just an example, and this is it. When you build on wetlands, you must restore or create other wetlands to replace the originals, so there is no net loss. Similarly, operating under the no net loss principle, if the Port of Bellingham were to remove a parcel of land from working waterfront use, the policy would lead it to add the equivalent elsewhere. So where do we go from here? We are requesting that you consider adopting the no net loss principle for two separate purposes. The first is as a corporate goal as part of the strategic budget process. The second and more difficult one is as a formal policy that would help guide Commission decisions. Writing a policy based on no net loss would require addressing a number of questions, including valuation criteria, a definition of mitigation, boundaries, and more. We think they are all solvable. There is a model for a process to write such a policy. In 2016, the Coalition formed a joint committee with the Real Estate Division under the leadership of Director Shirley McFerrin. The result was titled the Water Reliant Commercial Marine Rental Policy, which was approved unanimously by the Commission on April 18, 2017. Commissioners Bell and Shepard, you were not on the Commission then, so we have given you a time on the video of that meeting, and it's on the handout that you have in front of you. That video shows that the process was effective, and time has proven the resulting policy to be a valuable tool that attracts marine trades companies to port properties. One important point. Our request for a no net loss policy is not a response to any specific situation or proposal, nor is it an attempt to tie the hands of the current Commission. And of course, you have the final say over any policy that might come before you. So to sum up, we are asking you to consider adopting a no net loss policy in order to send this message. Not only is the Port of Bellingham open and eager for maritime sector business, we are doing our best to assure that this will be true for decades to come. I know you may have questions, but first, if I may, I'd like to introduce the 3 subcommittee members that helped put this proposal together and have them come up to the podium.
It's fine, Jim.
And I'll just let them introduce themselves.
George Dyson.
Mike McCauley.
And Pete Granger.
So here we are, we're available.
Commissioner Bell, questions? Okay, well, I'll start off a little bit if you need a minute. Okay. As you spoke to in the past, you worked with our real estate director, Shirley McFerrin, and to the coalition, you worked out what needed to be done. And it's turned out that I think it's going to be something that's very useful in the future for the commissions and the tenants. I would like to see the same course of action on this policy. I do not want to take action on it this evening. I would like port staff and yourselves, your committee, to get together and work stuff out in detail so the language is very clear and everybody understands it. But personally, I would like to see it move forward. That's why I asked for this presentation. So if you folks are okay with that, and staff, and Rob, and my fellow commissioners, I'm sure we have some questions too, but that's the direction I would like to see taken, is basically the same direction was taken before for the other stuff. So, Commissioner Bell.
Yeah, a couple of my questions just revolve around binding. And, you know, since we're not a zoning organization, and the city is, we can't really zone something working waterfront, plus it's not a legal zoning designation. So I'm just wondering what kind of teeth you expect this to have, or is it just another hurdle for somebody to jump if they want to change this? And the other concern I have is that we can't really bind other commissions. I mean, the next commission come along and they could completely change it. And that would be a concern. If whatever we do, we want to do it right? And I don't think we've got the legal authority to bind other commissions on something like this. So I need to get that clarified, just to make sure that we understand what the legal process is. Plus, there's a lot of the stuff that can be done at other venues, and I think the city needs to be involved in some of those discussions. So I think there's a deeper dive we need to do before we can pass this, and I agree with Commissioner Prisco. Maybe we just need some time to figure out what that path looks like.
I would caution against getting the city involved too much.
Yeah, we saw.
On that vein, why are we pursuing this through the port and not through a city zoning policy? The city, to my understanding, can identify zoning requirements, they can identify zoning categories, and ultimately that's what could lock a use in more concretely.
Well, I would say,
Please step up to the mic, Pete.
I would say potentially we do get the city involved, but our reasoning is that a policy doesn't necessarily bind you, but it does move you a step closer to being aware of what that stands for as situations come up. But it could be that we would want to get the city involved too.
And, I think what we're also hearing, as today is the first time I'm reading all the text of the proposal here, and I think there's probably some things our staff are going to want to look at around some of the specificity and making sure that it really is able to address both the intent and some of what we're able to do. I've got one question on the term no net loss. So it's come up in several conversations that people have brought to my attention, and you brought it up today that this is a term that is derived from, has a long history with wetlands mitigation. It's a term that has a long history with habitat protection. And there's been some blowback that this is a inappropriate use for that term, because that term is so tied up in a lot of federal, state, and other policy language around protection of habitat. And so if we're using that same exact term to ensure continuity of a industrial or business type application, there's been just some friction created there. And so we may alleviate some of that with thinking about, are there other terms that are more appropriate? Because we don't want this to segue into all these complicated discussions around SEPA and Growth Management Act and wetlands mitigation, which, given the location that most of our marine trades lands are on reclaimed habitat that is now been made into land and for use, you can just see where it can become a sensitive sticking point. And so that's one of the other questions I would have is there a better word choice, or is that something we can think through in a little more detail?
I would just say that certainly the wording could be changed. It was the intent that's the point. That wording was sort of used intentionally to make that analogy that we're all watercraft boating people, and in a way that is a sort of a species of work that is very habitat dependent. You have to have water access, and that is a limited resource that so all those analogies with protection apply. And certainly there is existing, both on the city side, even more importantly on the Shoreline Management Act side, there's lots of hard rules already that favor water dependent use, and all we would see is sort of leveraging that existing language, not reinventing anything new.
So as we can see, I think there's lots of questions and answers. That's why I suggest that staff works with the coalition and we iron this stuff out and come out with something that works for everybody and takes us well into the future. I think we're all aware that we can't do anything that binds future commission choices, but we can certainly do what's right now. Any further questions, gentlemen?
No, I think
I've just also heard some appreciation for bringing this forward, and I think one of the other clear things that I hear over and over again is we want to keep the diversification of our waterfront. We want to keep our waterfront having employable spaces and places for future generations, and so that it doesn't turn into some exclusive zone that no one else can participate in. So I think that is that intent, and that is a lot of the intent that we're supportive of as well. We just need to make sure that we're not going to create any unforeseen complications or problems in getting there.
Commissioner Bell.
And I just want to thank Commissioner McCauley. I want to thank you, Mr. Granger, Mr. Tyson, Mr. Kyle, for your time on this, because I think you put a lot of thought into this. One of the things I do want to reiterate is that our job is to create demand. This is not an issue that we need to address if we've got more demand. And our job here as an economic development tool is to try to bring the demand here so that it is just obvious, right? Rather than, right now, the reason that there's pressure is because the demand is coming from other sources. It's not coming from the marine trades industry. It's not coming from barging. It's not coming from shipping. We don't see them beating down our doors, but you do see developers beating down our doors. So the job of the port I view as being one where if we're going to focus on this, we need to focus on the demand side of this and make sure that we've got the demand coming here. And it really kind of makes this kind of thing irrelevant, because the demand will overcome and supersede the need for this as long as we focus on creating that demand. And I'm a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, and I think that that's really what we need to focus on, is making sure we bring those types of industries here, and it'll take care of itself.
Well, I don't know about take care of itself, but I do agree, and sort of, but by doing something like this, it's like an insurance policy to those companies to come here, because they know that if you want to call it a safe haven or what you will for their industry, those people will come because they have security, that they have something in place that will they'll always be there, they're not gonna get shoved aside. You know, and the ports of this state were created for access to the water for the people of the counties. And if you don't watch what's going on, you can gentrify and you can lose your access to the waterfront for the commerce. And this is a step, I feel, in that direction to secure as best we can that access for businesses to the water that are dependent upon the water. Not necessarily to bring other things here, but to secure what's here. That, you know, we're already looking at what they call the silver-haired flip over of businesses, right? Whatever you want to call it.
Silver tsunami. Hang 10. Hang 10, Bob.
Anyway.
You use that.
Commissioner, if I may, this is good stuff. And I look at this, because you mentioned the budget process, and I look at this statement here very much as a position. No net loss is a position the Working Waterfront wants to take. And when we meet, and I'm looking forward to working with you on this, I'm going to encourage you to look at more like it should be a goal of the commission or an interest of the commission to grow the marine trades area and always make sure we have plenty of property for the marine trades industry to do business on. That's more interest than position-based. So that's what I'll be pushing forward and work together. I think that's less confrontational to some folks, and it's also it's easier to justify in a budget because now we have a goal. Our goal is to grow the marine trades or the working waterfront industry.
Well, we appreciate your interest in this and your general agreement that we can move forward. We appreciate the fact that the staff, we can start to work on things like that. I don't think we're wedded to the words no net loss, Commissioner Shepard. There's certainly some thought will be given to the semantics of that as well. And I'm not of the opinion, we have several member companies who may want to do something on the waterfront that isn't maritime related, and we have to understand that as well and work with those folks. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I think it's a general consensus among the three of us that we move forward. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
And
there's-
staff. Okay.
Shirley's all over it.
Look at her grin. Look at her grin.
I'm so happy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. So we'll move on to the next presentation, which will be our financial report, I believe, then? Okay. She's keeping us in suspense. She's just staring at the screen. We know what's coming, though.
You know what's coming. Do you know how to tell the difference between an alligator and a crocodile?
Ooh.
You have to listen
Choose?
you have to listen very carefully if it says see you later or after a while.
Crocodile.
Feel free to use that.
Or not.
That was a funny one. I don't get it. All right. Thought it was funny.
Thank you, it was.
No apologies. Okay, so.
What are you apologizing now? We asked for the joke.
Can we just move on? Tamara Sobczak, Director of Finance. So this is the first quarter report. Obviously, just the first 3 months of the year, not a whole lot to report, so I'll be pretty brief. Just get into it. Start at the top. We ended last year with net assets of $250 million.
I was thinking, we're in
Like, we
trouble.
didn't do well, did we? And we ended the first quarter just above that. So not a big movement, but movement in the right direction. Two things to note here, long-term assets decreased, that's a function of depreciation, and long-term liabilities decreased, function of paying our debt. We have $13.5 million invested in federal securities at about 1.6% interest rate. And then the remainder of our cash is invested in the LGIP at just over 2.5% at the end of first quarter. So where do our revenues come from? First quarter 2019, $8.5 million. Almost $6 million of that was in operating, 2.2 in non-operating, and the rest in our public priorities. Same time frame last year, we had almost $6 million in operating and 3.3 in non-operating, and that was due to a payment received for environmental remediation that we didn't see in 2019. Looking at expenses, first quarter, $8.5 million. Excuse me, operating 3.7, non-operating 3.9. How does this compare to same time frame a year ago? We're a little high. We expect that. Cost of living goes up, but the pie shapes are the same. So operating about 3.5, non-operating 3.7. So very similar to prior year. So diving into the operating divisions, aviation. So we have the first quarter on the left, budget for the first quarter in the middle, and then same time frame prior year in blue. So aviation revenues were slightly below expected. That's mainly due to parking. All the other line items were at or above what we budgeted. And then expenses were below budget. And that's really due to the time of year. Repairs and maintenance, preventive maintenance, groundkeeping hasn't really picked up yet.
Just to add really quickly to this, one of the biggest expense busts, I should say, that we had in the first quarter was de-icing, salt, everything to do with snow in February. We ran out early. We were begging for it from Department of Transportation, city, anywhere we could find it. So that's the biggest budget bust, I think, in the first quarter for the airport.
And we might see that effect at the end of the year when winter hits again, and we don't have that extra budget.
What? It's coming twice?
Every time. So looking at the marinas, revenues were a little more than expected. We do seasonalize this budget, so it could even out by the end of the year. Revenues were a little higher in first quarter than we expected. Both pleasure and commercial were higher. And then expenses again, same thing with the airport, the seasonal repairs and maintenance, groundkeeping, not really in full swing yet.
Quick question on that. Are is the income higher because we're seeing more, because we raised our rates, or because we're seeing more commercial activity?
You know, I saw it, we budget with the rate increase. And so for it to come in higher than budget means just more activity. Yeah.
See, I told you.
Again, separated out the cruise terminal from the shipping terminal. Cruise terminal revenues and expenses are on budget. Recall, this is just the first quarter. The effect of the potential Alaska budget is not shown here. We won't see any of that until third, fourth quarter, if there's a budget hit. Shipping terminal, this is interesting. We budgeted pretty aggressively for 2019, but the shipping terminal's expenses are very variable. So as we get more activity, expenses will go up. So it's okay to budget aggressively in this program. Real estate revenues were as expected for the first 3 months. Expenses tracking as expected. So one thing to mention at this slide, the second quarter, third quarter, we'll probably see the effect of the bankruptcy on this one, compared to budget.
Ouch.
But to be fair, they weren't paying anyway, right?
Well, but we were billing them, and that's what shows up.
That's how, so when they're in business and they have a lease, we bill them every month and then it appears in the revenue, and until it becomes bad debt, it's in the revenue. So at some point that bad debt's going to reverse itself, and I believe you probably did that in April, or that entry is coming.
I think it's coming,
yeah.
April, May, maybe. Yeah.
They'll show in April and May.
Yeah, you'll see some shortfalls because we'll back out that revenue now, since we're not going to get it.
They'll be calling in then.
All right, overhead costs. So this looks like we're busting our budget, but we aren't. In overhead, we have a lot of front-loaded costs, like the auditors are here. Those costs have come in the beginning of the year. We have an annual Department of Emergency Management assessment that comes in the beginning of the year. Membership dues come in the beginning of the year. So this definitely will level out. Public priorities. Revenues are tracking fine. The expenses are coming in low because economic development budgeted for a large number of studies that have not been done yet. So if those studies get done, we'll expect to see this come in closer to budget. So that's it for the finance part of it. Risk management activities. We did have one major incident in 2019 that the commission is aware of, that fire suppression system water pipe broke at the airport, and that's being handled through our insurance company. Open claims for the port, we just have one, the same one that's been showing up for a year and a half, the damage to the mooring dolphin, and that's still being handled. We have two open claims against the port. They're both slip and falls, one from 2 years ago and one from last year. And again, those are both being handled through our insurance company. Stormwater program, both airport and shipping terminal are in compliance, including training and record keeping. At the airport, sample results were within permit limits. And then at the shipping terminal, same issue we had last quarter. There was a turbidity benchmark exceeded at one location. Those responses have been completed. Safety report, absolutely nothing to report here. 0 injuries the first 3 months.
Yay, good
Yay.
job.
Public records requests, we had 27 requests in the first 3 months of the year.
What did we do?
Well, I don't know if people were asleep, because at this point we have almost 50. So I think they just took a break the first quarter. And those were pretty small, only cost us about 22 staff hours to fulfill those. And that is it for my report. Any questions?
Commissioner Shepard.
I think you covered it. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Bell.
We'll get you
I
some
don't know
detail
that,
on
yeah.
how we're going to book that.
Yeah.
I don't think we've quite worked through
We
that
haven't
yet.
figured it
So
out.
we'll give you a full report out on that when we come to some conclusions.
Any idea on how large?
Oh, right now, we're talking about less than 200,000, but, the full bills aren't in yet. I think legal still has to weigh in with some invoices, and then we're going to be out some rent for months going forward as well.
It's the
So,
future rent that I'm more concerned about.
Yeah, it's definitely the going forward. I mean, the write-off for rent already booked is less than 200, but going forward, we're going to be out 60,000 a month unless we can lease that space as soon as possible.
So I do have a question. The public request stuff, weren't we putting in a new, or are we in the process of a new system?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. I meant to mention it. We have WebLink that is up and running. We just have to populate it with more documents.
Okay.
The airport's currently populating it with their most requested, just regular documents, and directing people to our website. So that'll really help.
I thought you were going to say the airport was populated with their most wet documents.
What?
Well, the flood. all their
Flooding, they did get,
Okay.
things did get wet.
Sorry, I missed it, like you missed my joke.
Oh, yes, you were joking. Anyway, thank you. I was just curious. I know we talked about that, trying to decrease. I was kind of wondering where
Yeah.
we were in it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the report. It's very well done.
You'd both be funnier if we were doing that beer and hot yoga thing.
There he is.
Hot yoga?
It is when you have beer.
Cold beer and hot yoga. Which is first?
Depends on how you want the session to go.
Oh, okay. So, gentlemen, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, we're at other business time. Commissioner Shepard, you're grinning, so you must have some. The list is long and incomplete, or?
I just, two things. One, to remind people that this weekend, there's a blessing of the fleet and memorial service at Squalicum Harbor on Saturday. I think all three of us are going to be there, and we're looking forward to the event. It's open to the public, and it should be generally a nice affair. Weather should be good. And while I was at the opening of boating season last weekend, and I was sitting around eating some delicious pancakes with my family, and I overheard somebody next to me saying, "Well, they really should do this at the port." And I kind of poked over, "Oh, you're probably talking to me. Yeah, I should probably listen." And there was a request for ATM at Squalicum Harbor. Have we had an ATM at Squalicum Harbor? I know that there used to be one at the small, what were they called? The small convenience store, and they've now decided to go out of business. Kind of the silver tsunami thing, the old generation who ran the place, younger generation didn't want to take it over, and so it's closing down, and it's definitely provided a real asset. And one of the things they had there was a ATM. Got a lot of use, lots of cash transactions happen there. And when we have events like Sea Feast or anything else, there's lots of need for cash. And I'm wondering if we can think about a location where we're able to provide that service.
So for the big events last year at Sea Feast, and I know it happened at Sea Feast, I believe it happened on 4th of July, we brought in ATMs for the day. And
Sure.
Those are certainly available. They come in on trailers, they come and go. Having one permanent here may be a problem if our change machine back here is any indication how often it's going to get broken into. I think we got hit 3 times last year on the little change machine next to the loft. Mm-hmm. So security gets to be a bit of a problem as well. It's going to have to be a factor weighed by whoever provides that.
Yeah, I mean, cash machines are all over the place. I think they've probably got security fairly well under wraps with how those are operated.
Someone's got to be willing to put it in. I mean, we're more than happy to lease space to someone and provide that, but someone's got to be willing to put it in. And the cash machines do get stolen, surprisingly enough.
But in the port office, inside the office.
Yeah, what if we had one of those that's mounted on the side of a building, so that's not I mean, I was at Whatcom Community College, and yes, we had a cash machine there that was one of those mobile ones, and it got taken. I don't know if they ever opened the thing, got the money out of it, but it did get taken, and they went to one that was hard mounted. And I was thinking more of something on the side of the building, maybe in conjunction with our office.
We can certainly do some sort of RFP to see if there's anyone interested in putting that in.
Yeah. Have we ever had anyone, any banks have ever approached us about this before?
Not to my knowledge. Alan, Shirley?
Sorry about that, for the record, Shirley McFerrin, Real Estate Director. We used to have ATMs. We had one at the Bellingham Cruise Terminal, and we had one in this building. And they weren't used enough, so they were pulled out, but that has been some time ago. So I think Rob's idea of an RFP is a good one.
We'll get on that, yep. That's easy as, figure out what location we want it in, then putting out a request.
I thought we had one over by the yacht club in that, under the, wasn't there one over there, a little coffee shop?
I think there used to be one over there, but it's not there anymore.
It's gone.
Yeah. I think these things don't see a number of transactions, then the owner of it moves it elsewhere where he thinks he's going to get those transactions. Yeah. But maybe we're at enough density down here now that it'll help justify it.
Okay. That's it for me.
Commissioner Bell.
Mine is just, I appreciate the presentation that was sent over for the bond rating. I mean, there's a lot of useful stuff in that. And I'm still stricken by the fact that you don't get to a private entity until you get to the BP Cherry Point refinery. The rest of that is all public. All of our biggest employers are still public.
You're getting blank stares from the other two commissioners. So commissioners, we will get you a final copy of that PowerPoint presentation. We have Moody's Investor Service coming, and we've been working with Commissioner Bell to present to them. So he has a draft version of a PowerPoint that he's talking to you about.
Anyway, it's worth your time to go through that at some point so we can discuss it at length, and I'm not talking to you out of hand. So I would love to discuss that entire presentation at some point when we get there. I seem to be ahead of the skis right now.
That's all right. We'll get it to the other commissioners. It's
You're
now
ahead of the silver tsunami. You're out
I'm
of
gonna lean back. Don't you silver tsunami me.
We're on the final version now. We've gotten that all.
the mirror later.
I just loved it. Thanks. Otherwise, I have nothing.
Well, I have one thing, at least. The Blessing of the Fleet was this past Sunday in Blaine, and I had two folks approach me and harassed me about not fixing the road out to the dock. And I told them that, well, we were kind of ready to fix our part, but the people uptown in that big building you see in Blaine weren't ready to fix their part. Could we get an update maybe for next meeting on what's going on with that project up there? I mean, there's a lot of, here we go with the rumor mill in Whatcom County. Everybody thinks the port is, and I mean, she literally thought the Port of Bellingham was stopping that project out there and we weren't fixing anything, and we had full control over what was going on. I explained to her what was going on, and then the city, you know, at this time didn't sound like they had finances to kind of uphold their part of it. So if we could get an update on it, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
There's some telescopes that are going to be put up out on that pier.
In Blaine?
Yeah. They're volunteer stuff, they're working on it. And I think I've spoken before either of you gentlemen were here about some kind of covered corners out there. We've got a predominant southeast wind, and when we have disabled folks out on the dock, when you can't get a car out there to get out there, there's no place for anybody to get out of any kind of weather. So I had talked about if we could put up a couple small walls with a partial overhead of some sort, maybe on each end, so that in the wintertime when folks are out there. And this, the reason I'm bringing this up is because if this telescope thing is done out there, it would be nice to do that in conjunction so that the stuff is covered and folks can use it and the weather doesn't. So it's something to think about. I mean, not our top priority, obviously, but something that the folks will use when they can. And I surely would like to get something done with that road. Maybe we have some options we can explore to help the city move along, or fund or grant or something. But it's been sitting there for a long time, and it is an eyesore for us. You know, we've got a beautiful pier out there that the port spent a lot of money on fixing up that's fairly inaccessible. And it's been, since I came to this office almost 4 years ago, we've been trying to figure out how to get that. How long is it, Rob? About 300 feet of road, 400 feet of road, something like that?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, on the road, there are the whole issue there is the bulkheads. Until we repair the bulkheads, you'd be wasting money on the road because it just sloughs off into the water. So we'll get you an update on where we're at with the bulkheads. And then regarding fixing the road and even the pier improvements, that'd be a great topic for our budget retreat when we're trying to wrestle about capital items.
But we really need input from the city on their intentions for the road, because our bulkhead repair and what we do to that facility is greatly changed if they're putting in a car passenger road.
Correct.
Or a walking road. So I think we really need to make sure we're making these decisions together, because the financial implications are quite dramatic.
Yeah, a two-lane road is a lot different than a one-lane road, which is different than a pedestrian corridor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
And now that we have, layman's terms, new blood in the city house up there, maybe we can get something cooking.
I'm not totally sure, you know, bad weather and telescoping go great together, but, you know.
You'd be amazed how many people wander out there. You know, you can look away from the rain.
Okay. It is a real nice location. There's very few other spots quite like it, so I'd love to see that road get repaired as well.
Other than that, I have nothing, gentlemen. Anybody have anything else? Anyone have anything they wanted to talk about or need to talk about? Meeting adjourned.